Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, thank my friend from Oklahoma for yielding. And Mr. Speaker, we are here to discuss the rules of the House, actually debating the rules package. And why this is so important is because this lays out the ability for the House to conduct business, for the House to not only conduct business, but for the House to address the problems that the American people across this country is facing. And let's just be very clear up front. We saw a lot of debate about this last week. At the heart of all of this discussions last week was very clear, surely from our side, that Washington is broken. And not just is Washington broken, but the way that this House has been running for the last few years has not been designed to address the problems of the people across this country. In fact, we've seen many of the problems that families are facing across America created by the things that have come out of this Congress, signed by President Biden. Why is inflation running away? Because spending's out of control. Because bills appear by dark of night, bills that nobody's read that are thousands of pages long, where members aren't even allowed to give input in committee, on the floor, to address problems they know their constituents will face if these bills pass. And yet the bills are passed because they're written in rooms behind closed doors by a small number of people, not concerned about the consequences that will affect so many millions of people across this nation. Mr. Speaker, for a long time, we've been saying this needs to change. In fact, we ran on an agenda to change the way that Washington works, to fix this broken system, to get our country back on track, and we were awarded the majority by the people across this country. And so today starts that process of fixing what's broken in Washington so that Washington can finally start working for the people of this country who are struggling. And so let's start with one basic thing, is reopening the People's House. For years, the American people were shut out of coming and seeing their government work. In fact, with proxy voting, which, by the way, ends in this rules package, members of Congress have to show up and work again. Just look at the bill that passed a few weeks ago, the omnibus spending bill. $1.7 trillion, mostly borrowed from countries like China. You look at all of the things that had absolutely nothing to do with the general operations of government that were thrown in that. Now, you can start looking at it today, but you surely couldn't look at it the day of the vote because very few people had the opportunity to read it. Over 4,000 pages dumped by dark of night right before the vote. And yes, a majority of this Congress voted by proxy on that bill. They weren't even here showing up to vote. Well, you know what? Americans all across the country have to show up to vote. They have to go to their work site. They can't work remotely. In fact, Congress doesn't work virtually. It's just not set up that way. And yet that's what we've seen the last 2 years. Committees that don't even meet in person. There are some committees that haven't had an in-person hearing for 2 years. We end that practice in this rules package, where committees actually have to get to work again, not only meeting in person, but in some cases going out into the field, going into the real world. Places like the border between the United States and Mexico, where, yes, despite the president's claim, there is a crisis at the border. And we've been talking about it for a long time. We've been trying to bring legislation, but that legislation's been rejected by a top-down structure. This rules package changed that so where we can finally start bringing bills to the floor to address things like the border crisis, to finally start addressing inflation and runaway spending. If a member of Congress has an idea and they want to bring an amendment to the floor, for so long they were shut out of that ability. You had a bill that was over $4 trillion in spending and taxes that was brought through multiple committees in Congress, and not one amendment was allowed to be brought forward and passed. In fact, even the majority was told in the committees, don't allow a single amendment to pass on a bill dealing with trillions of dollars in taxes and spending that is crushing families across America. So let's make Congress work for families again. Let's empower members of Congress to be able to represent their constituents. We were all elected by, on average, about 750,000 people. And for too long, each of members of Congress, Republican or Democrat, were denied the ability in so many different ways because the rules were structured to shut their ability down from representing their districts unless they were in a leadership position. That has to change, and under this rules package, that finally does change. So let's make this Congress work for the people who sent us here. We are, after all, the people's house. It's about time we start acting like it. Let's pass this rules package, get to work addressing the needs of the American people. I urge passage of this important piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, first let me congratulate our incredible new House Democratic leadership team, Hakeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, Pete Aguilar. It's a dawn of a new day here in Congress as a new generation takes on the solemn responsibility of leadership. Leader Jeffries has been tireless in his work to put people over politics. His steady leadership as chair of our Democratic caucus, uniting our members, harnessing their talent and diversity, and fighting tirelessly to make life better for the American people is a source of inspiration to me and to so many others. It's also a privilege to be here with my good friend, Tom Cole, someone who I respect greatly and who I know greatly respects this institution. We sit on opposite ends of the dais, but I admire Tom's leadership and the example that he sets. And even when we don't see eye to eye, I'm proud of our work to build an atmosphere of respectful dialogue on the Rules Committee. We've done so not just among our members, but amongst our hardworking staff. And I want to thank our minority and majority staff, led by Don Sisson and Kelly Dixon, for all of their hard work. I look forward to working with Mr. Cole and his team of this Congress to continue our collaboration on issues of shared concern. Mr. Speaker, as Leader Jeffries put it so succinctly this weekend, our Republican friends campaigned on the claim that they would fight against inflation and fight for the American people. But instead, all they've done is come to Washington and fight with each other. In fact, what's become crystal clear over the past few days is the extent to which the Republican Party has been hijacked by an extremist MAGA faction, a faction not interested in governing, but in their own egos, a faction not interested in compromise, but in their own power, a faction not interested in putting people over politics, but instead interested in putting their own political ambition over the people we serve. Now, here we are, nearly a week later, considering their deeply flawed rules package, the first legislation on the floor by this new majority, and they are using it to gut the Office of Congressional Ethics, attack women's access to abortion, make it easier for big oil companies to pollute, and interfere in ongoing criminal investigations into President Trump. They're making it easier for billionaires and big corporations to avoid paying their taxes. Is that part of their contract with America? Is that their big plan to help everyday people? Because most people who read this package would think it must be a joke. And what I'm concerned about is not just what's written down here. I'm concerned by the backroom deals that Speaker McCarthy made with the Freedom Caucus in exchange for their votes. Like Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace said just this weekend, and I quote, "We don't have any idea what promises were made." This is unconscionable. We're only 1 week into this, and this is how they're running this place. There's a report out by Punchbowl News, and let me read it. It said there's also a secret 3-page addendum that McCarthy and his allies hashed out during several days of grueling negotiations with the House Freedom Caucus. This pact includes the most controversial concessions that McCarthy made in order to become Speaker. 3 seats on the Rules Committee for conservatives, freezing spending at FY 2022 levels, a debt ceiling strategy, coveted committee assignments, and more. Is this what the Majority Leader meant when he talked about a new day and transparency? You know, these rules are not a serious attempt at governing. They're essentially a ransom note to America from the extreme right. The same members of Congress who held this body hostage last week are the ones who ran interference for the January 6th insurrectionists who tried to overturn a free and fair election. And even the new Speaker of the House voted to overturn the 2020 elections. We couldn't even get a public acknowledgement from him on the 2-year anniversary of that horrific day, not even a tweet. It is clear that Republicans welcomed the election deniers into their ranks with open arms, and now they are reaping what they have sown. The insurrectionists are in charge. I'm reminded of the words of President Kennedy, and I quote, "In the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside," end quote. The American people get it. They rejected extremism in the last 2 elections. That's why they picked Joe Biden, and that's why the red wave turned into a pink splash. But my Republican friends still aren't listening, and in fact, they're still empowering the extremists. Don't take my word for it. Let's go through their rules package. They're giving a single member the ability to remove the Speaker at any time, letting a small far-right faction hold their leadership hostage. They're trying to shut down criminal investigations into the former president's wrongdoing. They are making it easier to slash taxes on billionaire corporations while dismantling the social safety net. They're giving committee chairs unbalanced discretion over which witnesses can testify, rejecting pandemic safety procedures like remote voting, and trying to force an end to the congressional staff unionization. And the icing on the cake? A new subcommittee to push QAnon conspiracies and launch fake investigations into non-existent scandals. What's next? A rule requiring we all wear tinfoil hats? This package is disrespectful not just to this institution, but to the people who sent us here to govern. I urge a no vote, and I reserve my time.